Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? That's great. Yeah, I'm going to be focusing on reinventing the automobile, and I think like many of you here, you have a love affair with the automobile. I certainly have for much of my life. You know, and speaking of love, after the wedding of Kate and William, it turns out that Charles and Camilla were having a quiet glass of wine, and all of a sudden Camilla burst out and says, "Oh, I love you, I love you." And Charles said, "Is that you talking or the wine talking?" And she said, "It's me talking to the wine." So I think you need to get your questions right. I think our conference today couldn't be more appropriately located, recognizing that Carl Benz was granted the first patent for a gasoline-powered automobile 125 years ago. And we really did transition from horses to horsepower. And I wonder what Carl would think today if he came back and saw where his innovation ended up. If you think about what Benz invented and you think about what we have today, I think you can make the case that the DNA of the automobile has remained pretty much the same. By DNA, I'm talking about the fundamental design DNA. Our cars and trucks have mechanical drive with combustion engines. They're oil-based sources of fuel with mechanical and hydraulic controls. They're human-operated. They function pretty much in a standalone manner, and they were designed for general purpose. I think the automobile is a truly remarkable machine in the sense that it gives us the freedom to go where we want, when we want, with other people, carrying the goods that we want to carry with us. And very importantly, that invention provided a broad range of capabilities or different duty cycles from stop and go to continuous travel, from light loads to heavy loads. And I think given these compelling benefits, it's not at all surprising why, as Eva mentioned, that we have 1 billion automobiles in the world today. That's enormous scale. If you took all of these cars and parked them end to end and wrapped them around the planet, that line of traffic would go around 125 times. With that sense of scale, it's not surprising that we have some significant issues or challenges associated with the automobile. I won't detail them because I think one of the reasons you're here is because you're familiar with them. But importantly, these challenges do bring into question whether the sustainability of the automobile transportation system can continue without transformational change. And I think Jeff's review, which was absolutely extraordinary and insightful, gives us a sense of this being a very important question for all of us to be asking. And so I really appreciate the fact that FISITA has pulled us together to address this question. Fortunately, we've entered into a period where I believe we can truly begin thinking about a whole new DNA for the automobile. And I think this new DNA is going to be every bit as exciting as the previous DNA. How many of you here are engineers by training or background? Most of you are engineers. I heard once that the definition of an engineer is someone who likes to work with numbers but doesn't have the personality to be an accountant. Now, and there's two kinds of engineers. Introverted engineers look at their shoes when they talk to you, and extroverted engineers look at your shoes when they talk to you. But what's important here is we've entered into a very new period of time for automotive design and engineering because of this new DNA. We have the opportunity for electrical drive and electric motors to begin to supplement what we have with mechanical drive and combustion engines. We have diverse energy sources now truly beginning to come within our grasp to offset our 96% dependence on oil. Electronic and digital controls, in addition to mechanical and hydraulic controls, and very importantly, and I'll get into this in more detail, cars that can literally drive themselves. And I'll make a case today that that may be the most profound change we all experience with automotive technology. And our vehicles are becoming connected, and therefore they can be coordinated in ways we never thought before in the past, and very importantly, coordinated with public transit systems. And we now have the opportunity to be introducing specific purpose designs as opposed to that one-size-fits-all type of a design. So let me build on each of these in a little bit more detail. Many of us are working on this transformation that's taking place on vehicle electrification. It is important to recognize, though, that vehicle electrification is not one thing. We have over here 100% mechanical cars and over here 100% electrical cars. And in between, We have mechanical drive with electrical assist and electrical drive with mechanical assist, and all of this is important. We simply can't get caught up in a debate where we say one of these is the best, and we have to commit to all of it. And I think when you look at the diversity of cities that Jeff made very clear to us, this portfolio of technology will prove to be important. Similarly, we have alternative sources for transport energy. Today, 96% comes from oil, but given the plentiful natural gas that's now coming online in part from shale gas, coal, biomass, nuclear, solar, and geothermal, what we find out is we have really two pathways, those with mechanical drive vehicles and those with electrical drive. And this diversity gives us some exciting opportunities to get off of this high dependence on oil. And these non-oil pathways are very interesting. You know, natural gas can be used three different ways as a source of transportation energy. It can be compressed or liquefied and burned in a combustion engine. It can be burned to make electricity for plug-in electric vehicles, and it can be reformed to make hydrogen for fuel cell. Now, if you had a liter of natural gas and you were asked the question, which could you go farthest with on these three pathways, actually it turns out turning it into hydrogen for fuel cells will take you the farthest because of the efficiency of the fuel cell. Similarly with biomass, it can be used in a variety of ways, and when you ask that same question, biomass as a source of hydrogen will actually create the greatest distance off of a ton of biomass. Then we have the renewables. The point is we have all of this, and I don't want to try to decide which is the best. I think they all have a chance to play out. But perhaps what's going to prove to be the most profound opportunity that we have with automotive technology are driverless vehicles. I'm talking about cars that literally drive themselves. And it sort of reminds me of the story of a mother was putting her daughter to bed one night and was reading a fairy tale story, and her daughter asked, "Mom, do all fairy tales start with once upon a time?" And she said, "No, some of them start with if I am elected." So you might think what I'm going to show you next is a bit of a fairy tale, but in fact, this technology is playing out. This happens to be the GM competitor in a competition called the DARPA Urban Challenge. It looks as if a ghost is actually controlling this vehicle, but actually there were no people in the car, no remote control. It was a self-driven car. I think what was fascinating about that, it was part of a competition where 85 teams entered to compete to see who could create a car that could go 60 miles in a city setting totally autonomously and do that in less than 6 hours and obey all traffic laws. So I think I was more impressed by the fact that so many teams thought they could pull this off. 11 made it to the race day, and the GM team with Carnegie Mellon University won. Volkswagen and Stanford came in second. 4 cars completed the race, and we actually felt we made a big step forward. Now, what I'm going to show you next is what Google did. Google hired a number of the young engineers at that competition, and then they equipped a number of Priuses, and this is actual footage of a self-driving car. You saw at the initial part avoiding a truck, the deer. This is the Prius that's equipped with Google's technology, being filmed as it's driving itself. It can stop at a traffic light. It can pick up the fact that a pedestrian with a baby stroller is crossing in front. Google went on public roads, and they've accumulated about 200,000 miles of driving on a wide range of roadways throughout California. This happens to be a famous street called Lombard Street in San Francisco, and this is footage of Google's self-driving car going down Lombard Street. The point here is that we've gone from just laboratories and experiments and proving grounds and controlled competitions to actually public road experience. Just to give you a sense of what's going on, Google, not surprisingly, has very rich digital maps, and they have deep experience with a wide range of laser, radar, and camera-based sensors, and they're able to fuse all that information together. They're able to then code, essentially, different objects along the roadway, whether they're pedestrians or vehicles, and then make sense out of that as the car is driving itself through the area. Now, where exactly this heads is still to be determined. Google positions this as a research and development project, but the progress that's being made is dramatic. I do advise Google. I go to Mountain View, California once a month. I ride in these cars month by month. You can just see the learning curves that all of us as engineers have grown to appreciate. Now, why focus on driverless vehicles? They truly are compelling. You get more value from your time and your vehicle. as head of R&D at GM, there was a lot of pressure on us to address this whole concern about driver distraction. I became convinced that consumers were telling us that driving is the distraction. Why else would anyone possibly be sending a text message at 70 miles an hour on a 4,000-pound machine? So as we thought about this, we realized that people spend quite a bit of time in their car each day, and even if your time is worth $25 an hour, that's equivalent to over $6,000 of time benefit if we could give you that hour back. If you're a $50 an hour person, that's $12,500 per year. Vehicles that don't crash give us an opportunity to eliminate roadway fatalities, injuries, and property damage, and very, very importantly, it enables us to design cars that are much lighter. And that lighter vehicle then enhances energy efficiency, and ultimately it lets us make better use of the batteries that we're trying to put into the electric vehicles, both plug-in and hydrogen batteries. Now, when you marry driverless vehicles with what we call the mobility internet, things become even more interesting. The mobility internet is all about coordinating the movement of goods and people in very precise ways. It manages huge amounts of spatial and temporal connectivity data, and it coordinates at a very fine scale as well as at a grander scale. And then you optimize the safe traffic flow, roadway and parking space, vehicle fleets, and energy supplies. And essentially what this mobility internet does is it does for vehicles what the information internet did for computers. Quite honestly, when you combine this with the information internet and the energy internet or the smart grid, it really starts to become transformational. Now, the third part of this story involves what we call specific purpose designs. These are vehicles that are tailored to those driving cycles and duty cycles and tailored to the trip characteristics. You really have to ask yourself, why are we creating cars that can go 120 to 150 miles an hour when they're traveling in cities with average speeds of 15 to 20 miles per hour? That's just a huge mismatch. So if we can begin to think about tailoring our vehicles, we can be more energy efficient, space efficient, time efficient, and cost efficient. And this then becomes enabled by lower mass and fewer parts in these designs, new, fresh, exciting proportions for vehicles that can be controlled by wire with wheel motors. We've already talked about the mega trend of urbanization, so I won't repeat these facts. It is interesting as we study cities that the older cities tend to be less dense in downtown areas than the newer cities, and we have a wide range of population densities, as Jeff taught us earlier. And because of the population densities, the average speed in the cities does vary dramatically, with many of these large cities having speeds on the order of 15 to 20 miles per hour. So what we decided to do is begin to put all this together. Could we reinvent the automobile around this new DNA, focusing on this key trend of urbanization? In essence, we're taking the electrification of the vehicle, marrying it up with connected and driverless vehicles, and that gets you to that new DNA. We bring in urbanization, and that helps us get into this opportunity of smart grids and the energy internet and the mobility internet. And you put all that together and began to help us think about how might we reinvent the automobile, but maybe as importantly, be thinking about reinventing personal mobility. And Christophe's introduction mentioned a book that we put together on this called Reinventing the Automobile. It was published in January of 2010. Myself and two colleagues put that book together, and it really captures many of the concepts that I'm talking about today. What I want to do is show you an animation of where this might take us. GM, along with its partner Shanghai Automotive, had the exclusive rights to the pavilion in the Shanghai World Expo. The expo had 70 million visitors, and we were asked to think about better city, better life, and the role of personal mobility in those cities in the year 2030. So we began conceiving this vehicle concept, which is really based on two wheels. You can't read that. It's a wide range of sensors that give you a sense of what's going on. The vehicles can communicate with each other and therefore operate in a platooned fashion. And they weigh about 500 to 750 pounds. You can give priority to emergency vehicles as they're moving through cities through these communication technologies. In addition, you can begin to think about different concepts for traffic flow. This is one of those moments where you begin to say, is this a fairy tale or not? but we have been able to do quite a bit of experimenting with these types of communication systems. In addition, we can begin to think creatively about the overall internet and cloud that connects all of us, the opportunity to recharge these vehicles inductively. Such vehicles would have 3 to 4 kilowatt hour batteries. The Chevy Volt has a 16 kilowatt hour battery, the Nissan Leaf a 24 kilowatt hour battery. These vehicles are driverless, they can drive themselves. We can begin to think about innovative approaches to parking, although you may not want to have a cup of coffee sitting in your car with this parking system. It does give you a sense of what might be possible. And importantly, we began to think about the vehicle again from a fashion standpoint. This is a machine that you wear and you park it in your closet as opposed to necessarily parking it in your garage. Now, I've gone through this not to try to convince you that this is the answer. It's to help you understand that we have some technology coming together that really lets us begin to think in a transformational way. And how big might that transformation be? Let me give you a sense of it. The first number I want to put up here is a 15 times improvement in energy efficiency. Where does that come from? This class of vehicles will weigh about 1/5 what an automobile weighs. And because it's more conducive to electric drive, which is 3 times as efficient as a combustion engine, you get the 3x times the 5x or the 15x. You know, as head of R&D at GM, oftentimes I go to bed at night thinking about one thing, and that was only 1% of the BTUs in a gallon of gasoline burned in the car moves me, the person in the car. And as an engineer, you've got to believe we can do better than that, and we will. The second number is 10x. There's 1/10 as many parts in the design of these vehicles as there are in conventional automobiles. Just picture an internal combustion engine and all the parts that have to be precisely machined and integrated together. And here we have designs that are much simpler. The first 5x is you can park 5 of these in the space that it takes to park a conventional automobile. And the second 5x is that it is about 1/5 as costly in total cost. That's parking, energy, depreciation, tolls, insurance to own and operate such a machine. And maybe the most important number of all is 0x, because these are envisioned as machines that don't run into each other. Why, when we are pedestrians walking around in very crowded areas, we tend not to run into each other? Somehow we know how to bob and we even avoid other people, but yet we accept our cars crashing. Again, as engineers, I think we can do better than that. But as we thought about this, we went even further. There is an additional opportunity here that makes those numbers even seem small in comparison, and that's to introduce the notion of shared vehicles. Now, any of us who've been paying attention to the literature in innovation recognize that what happens is a whole bunch of faint signals are out there telling us that change is coming. No one can quite see it. And when you look back, you say, oh, of course, it's on its way. Shared vehicles with companies like Zipcar, Relay Ride, obviously taxis and limos, and then some of the vehicle concepts I showed earlier with ideas that sprung off from notions like the Segway. Those are those faint signals that are out there that are telling us that when we put all this together, maybe we can match the accessibility freedom of today's cars and trucks at dramatically lower consumer and societal costs. Maybe we don't have to think about this as a trade-off, but in fact we could come up with an even better mobility system. And to illustrate these 4 variables together, recently conducted a case study on a city called Ann Arbor, Michigan. That happens to be where University of Michigan is located. And that little red box is an urban area that makes up the city of Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and Chelsea. In this city, there's 285,000 people, so certainly not on the scale of the cities that we were talking about in the previous presentation. 130 square miles, 200,000 personally owned vehicles. So this is one of those places where the density of vehicles is pretty high. 740,000 trips a day, with average trip lengths and times shown here. And the vehicles are used on average 60 minutes a day, or just 4% of the time. So what are the vehicles doing when they're not being used? They're being parked. So we ask ourselves, first of all, what does this cost a person to have a car in Ann Arbor? And we wanted to get inside of that a little bit more. We also wanted to understand, when are the vehicles on the road? And it turns out that the peak time for the road usage in Ann Arbor is right around 5 in the evening, but just over 10% of the cars are on the road at that time. So you have all of these vehicles that everybody owns personally sitting around most of the time, and relatively small percentage of them being used at the same time. It turns out that the out-of-pocket cost for owning and operating a car and parking it in the Ann Arbor area is about $25 a day. These are approximate numbers. So you have depreciation, you have the energy, and maintenance costs, and you have parking. And then I mentioned before this time value, and it's a hard thing to put value on time. We peg it at between $25 and $50 a day in terms of the time people spend on the road. And that can be argued, well, if you gave me back my hour, I couldn't be employed any more than what I am today, so I'm not going to make money off of it, but maybe that would free you up to do things so that when you arrived at home, you could be more active in your community or more active with your kids, and there's value in that. And you put that together, and it suggests $50 to $75 a day is what it's costing people in Ann Arbor to own a car. So what might be possible? How might we put all these things together and think about mobility differently? First of all, you could have shared fleets of coordinated specific purpose vehicles. So 1 and 2 passenger vehicles for personal activities. Why move a 4,000-pound car when I'm the only person moving? 4 to 6 passenger for family and group activities, and maybe some light duty trucks for loads when you need to carry loads, but these are shared. The right vehicle would arrive at your origin when you need it and take you to your destination while you use your time as desired, not distracted by the need to drive. And then that vehicle would go to the next best location to serve someone else. And what we ask ourselves is, how big would these fleets need to be? How might you coordinate them to give you the spontaneity of having owned your own car? Like, hey, suddenly I need to make a trip and I want to go, where's my car? And also to meet the same travel demand. So we didn't reduce trips or ask people to change their mobility patterns at all. And then we had these vehicles that are tailored and much more highly utilized, and then we minimize those empty miles of redeploying them. So that was a basic idea. So I'm going to take that first cost information, personally owned vehicles, and I'm going to take the $25 an hour person here. So this is $50. And the first thing we'll do is we'll introduce personally owned driverless vehicles. So if the vehicle's driving itself, you get your $25 back. Then we're going to introduce the notion of sharing vehicles. And the 50 is now down to 7. How could that be? Well, we through our queuing models and network models, calculated that we would need about 15 to 20% of the number of cars in Ann Arbor today in order to give the same level of responsiveness and the same travel patterns as the people in Ann Arbor already have. So we've taken that capital out of the system, and obviously you're going to take the parking costs out because these cars aren't being parked, they're being redeployed to be used again. And then finally, if you have these vehicles tailored, because many of these trips were 1 and 2 person trips that could be made in a 5 to 750-pound car, now you can begin to save energy as well as the capital. So is this a fairy tale or not? This is a 25x opportunity through the eyes of the consumers. What we're telling you here is that you can take a community like Ann Arbor and reduce the cost per day from $50 to $2 and still have the same spontaneity and mobility patterns that you would have by owning your own vehicle. I find that pretty compelling. I'm not saying this is the only answer, but it certainly begins to give you a sense of the new tools we now have at our disposal. What you need to keep in mind is that a lot of industries have been disrupted. And just think about some of these things. The photography industry, media, entertainment, the computer industry, telecom, television, or pharmaceuticals. I came from a company that was disrupted, one that went bankrupt, and I know what that's like. But many people who worked in those industries had similar experiences, because incumbents rarely do well when industries disrupt. There's something about being a big player in a mature industry that redirects all of the attention to the next quarter's profit. There's something about having a wall around you and not being able to break out to see what's possible. I would contend that the transportation and energy industries are as ripe for disruption right now as all of these industries are or had been. So what advice do I have for you? First of all, you're going to have to innovate. This is not just technology innovation. It's also systems innovation. How do you put all these pieces together so that you can create a total mobility system? I would contend that this small class of vehicles that we showed at the Shanghai World Expo, if they're shared, may be a way to interface with public transit much more effectively. So it could have high synergy with high density mass transit systems. In essence, what you have to do is do unto yourself before others do unto you. Reminds me of a story of one of my hobbies is to backpack. So I like to go up into the mountains, and I pay very special attention to the equipment that I take with me. And one day I was heading up a mountain, and a older gentleman was heading down the mountain, and he just had 2 small bags in his hands. And I said, "Hey, what do you have there?" He said, "Well, in this bag I have a bottle of whiskey in case I encounter a snake." I said, "What about your other bag?" He said, "I have a snake." So you have to think and prepare for that future. You have to place high priority, I believe, as an industry. We really need to up the priority on driverless vehicles and the mobility internet. Not to say that we're not paying attention to that. It even made it very clear that there's a lot of effort being put into place to try to get the nations of the world moving forward. But from a technological readiness standpoint, we're really close. We are very, very close to cars that can drive themselves. And now we're going to be turning that whole issue into the hands of liability concerns, regulators, codes and standards, and that's going to be a very, very important journey to take as fast as we can. We need collaboration on codes and standards. We need to accelerate the learning with real consumers with integrated systems, and this is where it gets really, really hard. We can only take our engineering development work so far in the laboratory and the proving grounds. We can only do so many demonstration programs that tell us maybe there's something there. At some point, you have to get these products into the hands of real people and make them with real suppliers. I think we need to be proactively pursuing sustainable mobility. There has been some history, I think, of resisting it, saying that maybe it's not as big of an issue as it's being made out to be. The fact is, it's within our grasp, and I believe the consumer is going to love what we come up with. And I think there's going to be ways to make some really good money doing it. So why are we waiting? I'll end there. Thank you very much.